McCutcheon from the Vault. So Bob, thanks so much for being with us today live for the first time on Crew Call with the Scooters.
I'm not nervous.
Yeah, you shouldn't be at all. This is like everything else we do. So this is fair game for you. I think that's perfect.
Thanks for having
me.
I
want to go through a couple of different things that we've been talking about, especially with business and small businesses and nonprofits, because you in corporate, you touch all of those worlds all of the time, and you have some really keen insight onto what is happening. So we've been talking about it. You've been giving us really good advice throughout this entire thing. But also, I want to just talk about the Vault and what's going on there. And I want to start there first. So let's dive into your background a little bit. So you have this really incredible, storied career as managing partner, am I right, at PwC. So, but you were a musician at first, you had a garage, but you were producing out of the garage. Like there's so much happening there. So if you can do a little bit of your background.
That was a good summary.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a musician all my life. And even back in college, I had my first recording studio in college. Ironically, I went to business school thinking I was, maybe going to run my own recording studio or business, but I had a career for 25, 27 years in business, working for PwC, retired back in 2018. But yeah, I was the managing partner in Pittsburgh, and I was an industry leader for the firm. And I loved it. I mean, the access that I had to just amazingly talented people, between those that I was working with at the firm and, some of the best clients in the world. And I learned a lot. And, then, a couple of things, I woke up one day and realized that, that passion that I had for music in the studio never really went away. And you've heard this story. I saw this documentary by Dave Grohl called Sound City coming home from Europe, and it totally changed me. I knew I got off that plane and said, I have to do this. I want to start the studio I always wanted. And it started off as a passion project. And then, a little bit later, actually, after the loss of my son, we, started rethinking where we wanted to go long term. And so I decided to make a pretty significant change. And I just decided to spend some more time at home with family and pursue some of those passions. And so we started really operating the studio at a different level. And we established a charitable fund called the Rhythm 19 Fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation. It was in my son's memory. And that's really supporting music education, changing people's lives, particularly, students and younger adults, where we think we can really have an impact on their lives through music. And so I've taken a different, a little bit of a different path. And as a family, we spent a lot of time working on that. Yeah. But, I was joking. I'd say I never know which hat to put on because, with everything we've got going on with coronavirus right now, it's hard for me to put aside all of those other experiences that I have. I continue to be active in the community through, some of the not-for-profit boards that I work with. I'm still active with the Pittsburgh Symphony and WQED boards. And we work with a lot of other not-for-profits just through the Rhythm 19 Fund. So, I look at this from a lot of different angles as a small business owner, as somebody who's working in the not-for-profit space, as, a former financial and business advisor. It's hard for me, not to look at all of this stuff and try to figure out what's going on and help people solve problems because I spent so much of my life doing that.
Well, and so many people are leaning on you. I think your phone never stops ringing. I think the big irony of you retiring is that you're working at a pace that feels much like a full-time job because you have so many people that rely on your knowledge and wisdom in terms of business and how you see things and how you can bring people together. Can you talk a little bit about what you're feeling right now in terms of nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary time, right? I mean, obviously, we turned off the light switch and all of this economic activity. And, it's like, and a lot of us have worked through and managed through crises before, you know, between 9/11 and, you know, the Great Recession and the financial crisis in 2008-9. So we have a bit of a playbook on how to get through some of those things, but this is so different. It's so different, and everybody is affected. It was so abrupt in terms of the impact. And so just trying to figure out what to do next. And some of the things that you would typically do in an economic downturn may or may not be the right answers right out of the gate. You really have to stop and think about the implications of what you're doing and the timing and the sequencing of what you're doing. And, you know, the government programs that are being rolled out on a regular basis that are hundreds and hundreds of pages long,
right?
And trying to understand, well, does that apply to me? Does it not apply to me? How do I go about access to that support is really, really challenging. And often it's the small businesses. You know, we're doing a lot, you know, as you know, because you're helping tremendously with supporting, you know, those hospitality workers, right, who are all out of work. Well, those small business owners, those restaurants and bars, don't have an abundance of resources available to them to figure this out. I mean, the only thing I say is call your accountant, right? Call your accountant and figure out with their help how this is going to apply to you and your specific circumstances. But there's help out there. Right?
But the money seems to be not coming. And there's a lot of people going, I'm not receiving a check and I don't know how to, and I'm getting kicked out of the system. And there's so much frustration. And we saw so many organizations furlough a bunch of their employees immediately. It was like everybody's laid off. Like, what does that do in terms of impact to be able to get money, to be able to kind of be a part of some of those programs that are coming from the government?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because there's a good example of the old playbook, right? If I'm in an economic downturn and I know I'm going to have a significant drop in my revenue and I'm going to have to, you know, rationalize my costs just to survive, then, you know, you start looking at every line, right? I say it's, you know, we get very focused on people, understandably. I mean, it's important. That's you know, it means so much to all of us, but, you know, we're saving paper clips where we can, right? I mean, it's everything that you can do. And unfortunately, with some of these government programs, you have to be very, very careful. You know, a good example, and one we've talked about, is this payroll protection program, right? There's opportunities to take these loans, and if you can avoid layoffs, furloughs, or any significant reductions in your headcount during this period, you actually can qualify for that loan to be forgiven as a grant. Right? But if you don't understand that and you start laying off people in advance of accessing those funds, then you may find that you owe that money back because you reduced your headcount. And that doesn't apply to everybody. And you know, there's a lot of detail behind it in terms of the qualifying criteria, but it's confusing and it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. And it's all coming out at once.
Why do you think the message, and we were trying to understand this before, because it was like small businesses, $10,000 for payroll or whatever it was. And then they came back out and changed it. And it was like, well, employees that were with you full time since January 31st, and then we're going to figure it out. I mean, I think a lot of people were looking at those funds going, oh, I can get cash and this is going to help. And now it's, you might not be qualified. What you thought you might get, you're not going to. And also you might not get it right now. And then there's a lot of playing around with the banks. I'm sure you saw Mark Cuban's, I can't remember what publication he was, maybe the Times, I can't remember, but he was like, banks are being banks and trying to make the most money during this time and not set themselves upside down. So it's confusing, I think, as small business.
And in fairness to everybody in the process, you know, there was a need for speed, right? And so this is not a well-oiled, perfectly polished machine. There wasn't time for that, right?
I appreciate the Top Gun reference too, just, you know.
So yeah, there's going to be bumps and there's going to be complications and unanswered questions. And I think the banks, in their defense, were handed the administration of these loans without a lot of guidance and rules on how to do it, right? The SBA was working through the banks, which, by the way, provided a lot more flexibility and access than if we had to work through, one funnel. I mean, I think the ability to work with your banking relationship directly was probably the best way, the most efficient way to manage something like this. But everybody was working without guidance and doing the best that they could to keep it moving and learn as we go.
Mm-hmm.
Under normal circumstance, you'd want to learn, understand, evaluate, and then roll it out. But in this case, we had to learn as we go.
He said, I think it was the FCC chair was on Squawk Box, and he was like, yeah, we've had some issues, but essentially we rolled it out in 72 hours. And I think it was really hard because they started sending out links and sending people to places that just crashed. And I think that's another part of the anxiety, is that not only do I have anxiety going to the store to get milk, and now I have anxiety about how I'm going to pay for the milk, because are we going to be able to get the money? So it's like everything feels like it's working against us. And how do you manage through that, not only as a nonprofit, but as a small business? Like, what's the mindset do you think that we need to have to, or what's the, hope is not a strategy, but what is the hope and action that can help us?
Well, hope is definitely not a strategy. And I think, one of the things that I'm spending a lot of time talking about with a lot of different organizations, this is a black swan event, right? Mm-hmm. Hope that it's just going to be what it was before anytime soon, I think, is a little bit risky. Mm-hmm. And I think the organizations that are the most agile and the most innovative and the most open to change mm-hmm. are the ones who are going to come out of this stronger. Those who are sitting here just kind of hoping and wishing that it's going to be what it was before, run the risk that they're left behind. And I think that's really scary, because, change agility is going to be critically important here. We don't know what this looks like even when we are not necessarily quarantined and stuck in the house, and we can begin some level of economic activity again. Mm-hmm. What's that going to look like, and how do we adapt to that? And from a business perspective, what does that mean to my business? How do I have to change what I was doing before to be responsive? Mm-hmm. One of the questions, or one of the comments I made to somebody earlier today was, we are not only just selling what we've sold in our respective businesses, mm-hmm. but we're also going to have to sell confidence. We're going to have to sell security. Because our customers, in whatever industry we're in, our customers are going to need to feel safe in coming back. So it's just not that we're open again, but it's, hey, we're open and it's a safe place to come because we've done these things to make you comfortable, mm-hmm. right? And I think we need to be thinking about how we're going to make our customers and our clients comfortable that it's okay to do business again. Just saying that the door's open, I don't think is going to be enough.
And are you talking more in the retail segment when you say that, or is it?
Oh, I think it's across the board. It's even in a work environment, in a general office environment, how comfortable are your employees going to be coming back into an office if you were elbow to elbow in your workspace? It's
funny that you say that, because when we were in Sean O'Mara's on next week, we were talking with him, and he was like, and he's O Creations, and everybody will meet him next week. He was like, we work as a family. So they're a small, medium-sized design firm. And he goes, and we're all looking at each other. And he goes, and it wasn't like go home yet, but everything started happening. He goes, and this is like my family. I'm with these people all the time. And he goes, but we're looking at each other and having this moment of like, should we be here? Like, how do you, and you're totally right, because I think about it with our team, and it's like, I'd rather everybody just stay where they are and be safe instead of like exposing them to potential danger. Jeff Bezos came out today and said that we really can't reopen. I want to get your thought on this. Mm-hmm. Can't reopen up the economy until there's widespread testing that happens. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, again, reopen is not going to be, I think, what people originally think. Again, I don't think we're going to flip a switch back on.
Yeah.
and, blow the all clear, and everybody's going to walk out the door and it's going to be like it was before. I think this is going to be rolling. I mean, just looking at it practically, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can only really restart things when we feel safe to restart.
Mm-hmm.
What is safe? Well, that depends on where you are and the type of business that you have, or even your geographic location. Some places might feel safer because they didn't feel a surge, weren't greatly affected, and so maybe they feel a little bit more safe than somebody in a hotspot, right? And so I think this is going to be rolling. I know that, in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of debate right now about how do we do that? Essential versus non-essential, safe versus not safe, geographic. I don't know. There are a lot of ways to look at that. I don't know that there's one right answer, but we have to think about how to roll this out in a way that we can start certain activity where we believe it's safe to start that activity, and then monitor.
They keep talking about 3 different ways. I mean, I was doing some due diligence before this call because I was looking at the retailers that I pay the most attention to. And when you talk about safety or rolling out, I mean, the thing is that if we stay on shutdown like this, I mean, at some point, there's going to be bankruptcy on the other side of this in such a widespread manner. I mean, Starbucks is running at about 44%. Right now. We were talking, there's a whole thing about JCPenney on the verge of bankruptcy. What does that mean? Macy's and brands like Hilfiger, they're about 20% of online sales. So to open up malls again, and what does that mean? If we have no money, no one's buying anything. No one cares about a new t-shirt, jeans.
Well, again, I think this is going to change a lot prospectively, because not only do we have significant financial implications to some of these organizations, consumers are now forced to change behavior.
Yeah.
Now, some of those changes were already happening, so this could be an accelerator for some of those things. If you weren't really comfortable ordering things online, I bet you're doing some now, right? Yeah. If you weren't comfortable in video conferencing and working in a virtual environment, a lot of businesses are now embracing virtual and remote work where maybe they weren't before. And so I think there's going to be a real shift in terms of our behavior, both as a workforce, but also as consumers.
That's what Michelle Wright, of course. Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Michelle.
The decision to reopen might come more from consumers than businesses when people feel safe enough to go back out and get in. And I do agree with that. I mean, I know hair salons, and we have a client that's a really large styling community that we love so much, and they've been closed from the onset. And it's, you have so many, and then there's the 1 to 2 seaters that are out there, and all of these. There's so many people that are. I just can't. I mean, I know that the women and men want to get back in and get their hair cut and everything, but it's like, how do you feel safe to be able to do that? But at the same time, it's like, how do you want to, you have to still want to feel human in some, like normal in some way as well.
Well, and I think that's, the best way to assess that if you're a business, right? You can sit here and have these theoretical conversations about what's going to happen when we come out of this, and how are our customers going to behave, or how are our clients going to behave? And what I often say is, well, what would you do? I mean, how comfortable would you be in that? Let's make it real.
Yeah.
Right. You can talk theoretically about how people should come back and do X, right? Would you feel comfortable? You really have to put yourself in their shoes. Because Michelle's right. At the end of the day, the consumer and the customer is only going to do what they're comfortable doing. And it's not just about whether you've opened the door or not.
No, and you're absolutely right. I always take it from my mom's perspective. I'm like, what would my mom do? I always use her as the gauge. I'm like, what would Carol do in this situation? But it's absolutely the truth. I think in terms of nonprofits, everybody's trying to raise money right now. And we'll get into the Rhythm 19 Foundation in a minute. But in terms of, there are a lot of people that want to try to give. There's a lot of scams. There's like, how is my money being used? If people are trying to help give money, what should they be looking for in terms of what those organizations in your mind that are better?
Oh man, this is a tough one because the need is so great, and and you and I have talked about this. You watch the news, and I mean, my heart bleeds because it's so overwhelming when I see so many people in need in so many areas and aspects of society and our economy. It can be overwhelming, right? So I've always had the philosophy, if I tried to solve world hunger, right, at the largest level, I'm so overwhelmed by that I can be paralyzed and do nothing, right? So I think we still have to recognize that every little bit matters, and so if we each just try to find somewhere something, no matter how small, even if it's just lifting people's spirits, right? That we can do something to be helpful. If we all collectively do that, it will make a difference, right? But I think there are so many good things going on, and so many people trying to do things to help. One of the things I look for is, rather than recreate the wheel, rather than trying to make something right now that doesn't quite exist, can we look to those existing organizations who have the infrastructure, who have the network and the access to help us solve a specific problem, right? There isn't one organization that can solve all of this, but can we find somebody who's already well positioned and has the infrastructure to begin to immediately make a difference?
Let me ask about that. We were talking to Ashley Comans, and she works at Hype and lives in Wilkinsburg. And Marita Garrett is always, with Civically and doing incredible work over there. That whole community, raising up and really changing the face of it. But here's the thing. She said that the Wilkinsburg School District, they were handing out worksheets. They don't have access to great Wi-Fi. I know in rural communities as well, Kane, PA, friends in Kane, there's Mayor Shemp. She's trying to get better access to Wi-Fi out there. Do you think some of these larger issues where you have places where Wi-Fi isn't accessible, or there's opportunity to have it not only in urban and rural communities, do you think some of these things will become more of a forefront where they have to change because people have to have access, and more of a spotlight on that rather than just continuing to talk about it and nothing being done?
Yeah, I don't see any way we get through this without, there's a spotlight on a couple of very fundamental issues like that I think people will, not just coming out of this, but I think are already starting to realize that there are probably some companies and some larger organizations that now focused on access to technology, access to Wi-Fi is critically important going forward to public education, right? But if we're going to try to solve this at the individual community level, that's a real challenge. Again, they don't always have the infrastructure and the means to address that issue. But I think there are organizations, certainly technology firms and others, who, if they put their heads together, could solve this relatively easily. But now we have a spotlight on it. My hope is that they'll see that and they'll begin to address that as a societal issue. I think the other one that's already getting some debate is, there's a great concern about, the nursing homes and safety and security of those who might be most vulnerable right now. And so everybody's going to kind of step back and say, is there another way to look at some of this? Are we really focused on the right things? I don't know those answers, and I'm not necessarily here to judge all of those, but you're hearing that dialogue. We're getting focused on more focused again on inequalities, and even some of the criticisms around access to some of the government support that's out there. Is it equally accessible? And what networks and connections and relationships do you have to be able to quickly jump into some of these programs? Are we making it as easy for everybody to access, this support?
I would say no.
No, we're not. I mean, it's not.
And it's horrible. I mean, it's
it's not by design, but you learn very quickly where the flaws are in the system, and and we need to do something to close the gap.
Yeah, change. I mean, real change needs to happen. My grandmother is in a nursing home, so she's locked in her. They're normally able to socialize and things, but now that she's in her room, and
no, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. So let me switch over to what the Vault is doing, because you guys have been on a roll lately, to say the least. So yeah.
When you say you guys, you mean we guys, right?
So let's talk about Chris Wu and you, which could be a whole series of adventures. It could be a comic book series. Chris Wu and you, about what you guys were talking about a couple weeks ago, and how that turned in, and who he is.
Yeah, there's an example of, we realized that we weren't doing everything that we would have been doing under normal circumstances at the Vault. We had been talking for some time about, lifting our digital identity a bit, and doing some of the things that we wanted to do going forward. Obviously, now we're sitting here at home and thinking about all of the different ideas, the innovations, and how can we access our clients, our customers, our audience. And Chris is a dear friend from the work that we do together. He's a musician with the PSO, and we were just talking about music and how can we bring some music and some joy to all of this. And literally, we're talking about kind of technology and joking about all these Brady Bunch box videos, and how can we pull more musicians together and do something. And Chris had this idea of doing We Will Rock You and getting a bunch of familiar faces together. And it literally was sort of a phone conversation on a Friday, as you know, and through the weekend started texting friends who texted friends. And next thing you know, we had this crazy video with just amazing support from the community. And it was a message. It was a message of saying thank you to all of those frontline workers when, we can't stand on our balconies and cheer like we'd like to, but maybe here's a way to do this Pittsburgh style and do it with some music. And that message also turned into one that was really important, obviously, when we're trying to flatten the curve, and that is stay home, right? And the two really work well together, because in my view, it was the best way to thank those on the front line is for us to stay home and make it as safe for them as possible.
Well, Michelle had a little bit. Why don't you talk about her a little bit, because she's behind the scenes.
Michelle Rosenthal is just a dear friend who has just done so much to help this community, and her story is very personal, and there's so much love for her and her family. And we reached out to Michelle, and as she always does, it's how can I help? What can I do? And so she and Brett Kiesel, who's also a very good friend, just immediately stepped up and said, yeah, well, count me in, and what can I do to help, and who can I call? And I always said there was never a public call to action for any of this. We just, it was phone a friend, right?
Yeah, it was. And the mayor came through, and county executive Rich Fitzgerald, and they're always stepping up and doing stuff with us. So we appreciate that.
Michelle was fantastic at helping us spread the word as well. So.
Exactly. So that was amazing. And Chris Wu is a precious gem of a man who just is an incredible musician as well. So,
well, he and I already have all grand plans now that we're just going to do this and have the entire orchestra on, in little boxes playing one at a time.
I think that would be
technically that's easy to do, but
that's totally fine. Well, we were lucky to be a part of that. And then you're, what are you involved with now, Bob? What is this music that you're doing?
Yeah. So, so there's an event going on this Saturday that's it's a 12-hour virtual live concert that's like a telethon, right? It's for hospitality workers. It's an aid fund that we've established with the help of the United Way. So, getting back to trying to find organizations that had an established infrastructure and the means to be able to handle this. Clyde Calicott, who's in the band Right Turn Clyde, had started this grassroots effort to just gather some bands and do a virtual concert and try to raise money for the hospitality workers. And, it's something that's near to his heart. And he started off doing it, and we got connected, and we said, well, we think we can help you. We think we can make this bigger. So let's see what we can do. And it's just grown, and we have just, amazing, recognizable music talent from all over the city. And I think it's going to be an amazing event over the course of 12 hours where you can just watch some of your favorite local artists perform from their living room, right? Whether it's performing live acoustic sets, or many of them, understandably, in trying to be responsible and practice those social distancing guidelines, might say, well, we're a band, we can't all get together the way we'd like to, so let us submit a video or of a live performance. And others are submitting videos of support. So it's just another example of everybody coming together to try to raise money to help those who are in need. And these hospitality workers were some of the first to be hit. Hospitality workers in the gig economy were immediately shut down at the very beginning of this. Many of them are working for the same small businesses that are just trying to survive with these other programs. There's not a lot of infrastructure there in support. So this is a group that desperately needs some help in the near term, and hopefully we can make a difference on Saturday.
And I think the United Way stepped up in a huge way, because that connection has been great, because they're doing their own fund for this. And they've just been such an enjoyable organization to work with too. They're doing videos and they're helping support as much as they can. And I think
I'm sorry. They've been fantastic. I'm a former board member there as well. And so, my first thought immediately went to, they have such a wide net that they can cast over this region. And I was already familiar with 211, which I just think is a fantastic vehicle for people to gain access to resources. And so if you're not familiar with 211, think of it like dialing 911, except if you're just, one event away from having a catastrophic situation, whether it's financially, you can't pay your utility bills, you've got an elderly parent who needs help or access to resources, you can call 211 and they'll point you to the resources that can help.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, we're using 211 to identify those hospitality workers who have needs, and we can direct them, if necessary, direct them to the fund where we're raising this money, to be able to help them. Not that they'll be writing checks to individuals, but there will be money available to help defray some of those costs, whether it's a utility bill or groceries or whatever we need to do. We'll have financial resources there to help them as well.
Which I think is amazing. So everybody can watch and donate during that time. And they already have some donations rolling already, which is amazing. Rhythm 19. So the one thing about the Vault, which I love, one, you have an incredible family, and Brett is one of my favorite humans on the earth, along with Luke, his friend. But what I love is that you found an opportunity to really create impact, because you understand how important it is for access and opportunity to music. And we talk about the arts, supporting the arts, and how important it is using music and art to help learn in all the other subjects. And it's also, it's being creative is really freeing and exploring and connecting kind of the world and how you relate to it. And I think it's so important. And the Rhythm 19 Fund is constantly finding new ways to get into community and help support young musicians with instruments and scholarship. And so why don't you talk a little bit about some of those partnerships with the Neighborhood Academy and what you do with Stowe Rocks with Joe Gershecki and how some of those things are coming through?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we established the fund, as I mentioned earlier, in my son's memory, and he was a passionate musician, a drummer. He was the drum captain at North Allegheny. He had continued to perform while he was going to Robert Morris. He's actually a drummer in an independent group, Nomads. He was a drum line instructor for Hampton High School. And so he, instructing, teaching, and performing in music were a really significant portion of his life, much like my younger son, Brett. I mean, he's pursuing music as a career. It's obviously been important to Dana and I as well. So music's always been a part of that. So we established the fund, and it was really, to honor Ryan's memory and to think about how we can have that kind of impact in the community through music. So we're doing a lot of different things, and, similar to what I mentioned earlier about, revisiting and thinking more creatively and innovatively in times like these. We're starting to think maybe a little differently about some of the opportunities we have to make a difference. But we've done, things as simple as, granting scholarships at a number of the area high schools, music scholarships, leadership scholarships for those who are in the music programs. We've funded programs. We've helped fund some equipment purchases for schools that needed equipment. But we also are doing this. It's not just financial. Right. We're using the studio, the vault, as a place to bring that community together, right? And trying to find opportunities for those of us who are close to this to volunteer and get involved as well. So it's not just, we have a fund and there's money and we write checks. It's all of that. It's use the space, create opportunity, create community, create volunteer opportunities, and make a difference one-on-one with some of these students as well. So we've had tours from a number of the area high schools and middle schools come through. It's so fun to see, kids come into a professional recording studio and their eyes light up and wow, this is real, right? You can actually make real music and real records in a place like this, and to meet professionals, to meet, guys like Jimmy Hoyson, who's, a 6-time Grammy-winning engineer and producer, and talk about the things he's done for 35 years in Los Angeles and all the people he's met, or Dave Hillis. Similarly, right, the work that he did in Seattle, with some amazing bands like Pearl Jam. And then Chris Jameson is a great example, right? Chris has graciously volunteered his time with us as well. And so many talented artists and engineers and producers and those in the business who can share their experiences and their stories and maybe inspire some of these young students to pursue some of those passions. Right? But when we get to music education and music in our schools, I've always been a believer that can be a game changer in so many ways, from developing self-confidence and networks and friends and just having an outlet for pursuing a passion. But I also believe, and it's supported with a lot of research, that it has a huge impact on academic performance, leadership skills. And so I've always been concerned about the risk that we continue to defund some of these programs in schools, or, some schools, it's not even defunding, they just don't exist, right? And how do we provide access to instruments, instruction? I think to me, it's equally as important as having access to sports. It's an important outlet, and it's an important way to express yourself and learn who you are as an individual at an early age.
No, I totally agree. And I think, who's the Pittsburgh Pirate that just dropped his album? Who was that? Brian?
Stephen Brault.
Yeah, exactly. He would agree. Calling him out. Yeah.
No, as a matter of fact, he even was kind enough to add his voice to our video a week or two ago as well. But yeah, I think it's important to make sure that we have these opportunities accessible. So getting back to what do we do now, right, in today's environment? Well, my son is taking virtual lessons right now with his instructor. I mean, he's blessed to have the opportunity and the means to do that. But, he's going into college, he's majoring in music. So, he found a way to make sure he stayed on his game. But I worry about all these kids who are not in school right now, who don't have the ability to play their instrument or have access to those instructors. And think about all the individuals who were making a living giving private instruction. Do they have the means to be able to do this on a virtual basis, right? So how do we make sure that we stay connected and we can continue to provide access to music lessons and music instruction when we're so constrained like we are right now?
It's funny that you say that, because Kirsten, my niece, she's still doing lessons and classes at Penn State. And so she still has her recitals and practicums that she's doing and a lot of practices. And so when she's with her studio team, they're playing, but the speaker on your computer only goes to such a high register, and she's playing the oboe, so it kind of blows out a little bit. And it would be interesting if anybody's going to develop technology around this.
Yeah.
You're able to have much more of a frequency so that there is much more of a learning. She was saying a lot of the performance majors in piano and some of those things that they don't have access to, so they can do nothing right now.
Right. Think about how many of these instruments, these large instruments where the student never owned that instrument, they used the school's instrument. Now that instrument's now locked in a closet, in a cabinet somewhere in that school. Nobody's playing it, right? And the technology is a challenge because there's so much. I'm not gonna nerd out on the technical side of this, but there's latency in all those signals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So playing live together online is not as simple as people think it is, because you can't stay on tempo because of all the latency in the signal. So it's hard.
I don't know. I think you need to talk to somebody about developing that. That's what we need, Bob. You need
to go. Yeah. I'll put that on my list. I'll do that one tomorrow.
Can you do that? Somebody needs to call somebody at Amazon, make that happen with the AWS system.
Yeah, we're going to change the internet, I think, is what we have to do.
I think so too. I definitely think so too. Well, thank you so much for all of the advice and knowledge and wisdom, and for being a friend, and for being here today. I appreciate you. And so does Court. She's on the back end producing this, of course. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Court. No, thank you for having me. I mean, I appreciate everything you guys have done. You've been fantastic with us at the Vault, but as a family, and you guys are just doing amazing work. And I can't say enough to thank you for everything you guys are doing. So thanks for having me on. I'm happy to do what I can do from here in my home office to try to make a difference. But no, I appreciate it. Hang in there and be safe. And hopefully we'll get out of this and we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel here.
Thank you. I know. I hope so too. I really hope so. It'll be interesting to see what the rollout plan is going to be. So
thanks, Jenny.
All right.
All right.
Bye.